I very much focused on speaking to a translator. I picked her brains about what is that place you go to when you do simultaneous translating, because they sort of go into a zone. And when it comes to, the question of sexism in the workplace, there's not a lot of research I have to do for that.
Good point. You shot this before the election, before everything kind of. What was it like shooting this and kind of doing the research, especially for you? You had that. They actually talked to your character. Correct?
Yeah. I think when you go into making a picture that is based on a real tragedy where lives were lost, you feel a responsibility. And because Jeff Mason is still around, I felt an even greater responsibility to do justice to his story and to do justice to those journalists who were in that room on that day. But those conversations with him and understanding his apprehension and understanding the tremendous weight that still is there for him about the events that day made me, laser focused on getting it right and getting into news control rooms, learning the language, learning how to call a show, and being present. I don't think we weren't going into this trying to solve the crises that are going on in the world, but I think we were going into it to go back to the root of how these kind of tragedies are relayed to us through the media currently.
No, you have such an interesting character too, because you're dealing with sexism on the workplace, all these kind of things. How did you approach it? Yeah, what did you do to find? How much research did you do?
Well, I did I wanted to know everything about that, everything. I would try to find all the information I could on what actually happened during those 22 hours, and things before and afterwards. But that was just for me, Leonie, because I want to know. And then in preparation for the part, I very much focused on speaking to a translator. I picked her brains about what is that place you go to when you do simultaneous translating, because they sort of go into a zone. And when it comes to, the question of sexism in the workplace, there's not a lot of research I have to do for that.
Good point. This director comes from science fiction, and really good science fiction. It feels like he was the right person for this, because it feels kind of like, it almost feels like we're revisiting another world. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, in a way. I mean, Tim is... He's one of a kind. He's relentless, and he's focused, and I think science fiction, people who do good science fiction, they have that quality, because you're creating a whole world. Yeah. You have to create a world, and it has to be, every detail has to be exactly right. So stepping into this room, every detail had to be right too, but in a different way. Mm-hmm. And Tim was really that person to do it. I mean, we had working machines from the 70s. We had the real footage. We had, people in our ear. It was all...
Mm-hmm. Everything worked.
It was three-dimensional. It was tangible. It was tactile. And that was, because of Tim.
Yeah.
Ready, camera one. Hit it.
Good morning. I'm Jim McKay speaking to you live from the Olympics in Munich, West Germany.
Talk me through the day.
Starts with volleyball, then there's boxing.
Good. It's America versus Cuba.
Sure you want to bring in the politics?
It's not about politics. It's about emotions.
And we're clear. Great job, everyone.
So this maybe ended up being a little more relevant than maybe you thought when you started out.
Well, it amplified its relevance. I mean, really what the movie's about is journalism, right? I mean, and the way we consume news, who gets to tell the story, those types of things. But obviously, what was true in 1972 about this conflict is still true today. But, honestly, in 1972, it was true since 1948. So it's not like, it's the latest, obviously insanely violent iteration of something that's been going on for a while. But I do think what it does is it makes people pay attention to the movie and see what the real issues of the movie are. I think it's pretty hard to watch the movie and have it be something that says something explicit politically.
Agreed. Yeah. Agreed. What about you? I mean, what was your take going into this?
My take going into it, I didn't think that it was specifically about a conflict. I thought it was about a group of people doing their best to cover something unexpected. They were in place to cover one thing, and then totally randomly something occurred on their watch, and they do their best coping and covering that, sort of not fully doing their professional best, complicated by the fact that they weren't news people, they were sports people. But
it's quite moving to watch people try to do their best.
Yeah,
like, you know,
exactly. Because
it really
you know why? Because it's what we all do.
Yeah.
We hopefully, if we're fortunate enough, do our best with no, nefarious intention, and we muddle through, right?
Yeah,
They're muddling through. So to me,
As
it was
a
about
team
as an
also.
actor, it's a little, and that's it's a team cast. It was a team endeavor, and I think that I wasn't really thinking about those things. The
because
script was about the people.
And our face, like the characters, our face is just like right to the present moment every time we're doing it. You know, we're not. The characters aren't thinking about big issues. The characters are thinking, okay, well, this thing's unfolding. We have this new live camera. We should just point it at the window. Okay, now what? Now they're.
And maybe my character, because he was a logistics guy, a producer. Rune and Jeff are more pure.
You're asking
broadcast.
the ethical questions.
I'm the trouble. Well, yeah, but it's because he's a troubleshooter as well.
Yeah.
It's not that he's the moral conscience of the film. It's that he's the person that go, hang on a second, because that was his job, to foresee problems. Yours was to get it.
Yeah.
Yours was to get it. Jess was to facilitate getting it. Mine was to take care of everyone getting it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when people say, "Oh, you're the moral conscience of the movie." Well, maybe he is, and maybe that's the function he serves in the movie. But actually, it was a very good instinct of Tim's and Moritz's as writers to make him that, because he was the producer, he was the troubleshooter.
That's right.
Did you hear that?
Were those gunshots?
Wow, this is a powerful film.
Thank you.
I got to find out what was the genesis, because obviously we're seeing a whole new news cycle nowadays. What was the genesis in telling this story?
Yeah, it's a long genesis, but maybe trying to make it short, like we were generally researching about that day. We were trying to find out as much as possible, and we then quite early on learned on how important the role of the media was on that day. And this interested us, and as we deepened the research, we tried to find eyewitnesses. We quite early on learned on how important the ABC channel was on that day, because for one reason, they were the only ones that had a live camera on what was happening. And we then were lucky enough to find Jeffrey Mason, the character played by John Magaro, and had a conversation with him, and listening to his story and what they experienced on that day made us for the first time think about maybe telling the story entirely from that perspective.
Wow. Well,
I think Tim, too, his previous two films were sort of post-apocalyptic sci-fi movies, and was looking, obviously, to kind of tell a different type of story this time out. And it's worth noting, Tim is Swiss but went to film school in Munich, and the 50th anniversary was approaching of these events kind of at the time that he was sort of looking for his next project. And working with our German producing partners, Philip Trauer and Thomas Wobke, I think it was just a thing that was sort of at top of mind, and it collided really well, in terms of early genesis with the things that Tim wanted to do with his next movie.
Well, here's the thing. You come from this post-apocalyptic world. I can't talk, but you have in this is as apocalyptic as you can get. What were the similarities in creating something that needed to be so truthful and so real?
Yeah, there are similarities to
sci-fi.
In a way. Of course, also in sci-fi you do research, right? You do research, but you do research to get ideas of the future, or because at the end with sci-fi it's always something that you write that didn't happen. And here this did happen, so we had a lot of sources that we could get back to. Like, for example, on building the set we had could see the original construction plans of the studio and try to recreate that as accurately as possible. And we had, of course, we could see much of the footage that ABC did send air on that day, and that, of course, also was a really important resource for research.
Yeah, I think Tim is a sci-fi guy, not me, but I do think kind of watching Tim's other films against this one, you know, the approach suddenly becomes, you know, how do we still tell a good story, but also pay honor to the truth of what happened, and to the gravity of the questions, you know, that I think the film asks, and that we're still, as you said, you know, grappling with today.
That's a TV. Are they seeing what we're seeing?
What are you talking about?
Are the terrorists seeing this?
Our job is to tell the story of these individuals whose lives are at stake.
It's not okay if we made it worse.
Cameras on! It's a madhouse down here.
They know the whole world is watching. If they shoot someone on live television, whose story is that? Is it ours or is it theirs?
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo remains an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.